will have a graph,
Yes.
same total.
If technology lets us down, what do we do?
Yeah, that's we're not obliged to. We don't translate it. Same. I've just gone through all of that. So we should have.
We're live streaming.
Not just the tables.
But if there's technical difficulties, what do we do? Just,
We just do it. It's not a legal requirement.
yeah,
So-
and if we
And
record.
we are live.
We're live.
Live there.
Yes. Thank you.
Welcome everybody back to the public meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee. We will resume at matters for consideration, I think.
7.1.
Yes, annual report timetable and matters under consideration. Nick.
This paper is actually Sarah Munro. If Sarah's there, she could probably talk to it, but it is just give you the highlights. It's relatively straightforward, just outlines it sort of is part of the audit planning report that you just saw, but this is just the matters that we're considering with the upcoming annual report and the audit, and just any matters that we're looking at. But unless Sarah wants to jump in, there's nothing really of any significance. So it's just for the subcommittee to note the paper.
No, Nick is correct. There's nothing of significance there. The only change from last year is that we're trying to bring signing off the annual report back into its standard timetable. So last year we had to push it out for a month because there was a delay with the audit of Port Otago. In the current year, that delay is not expected. So we're going back to the normal timetable.
Thank you, Sarah. Kevin.
Yeah, just one wee question. Look, happy with the report. It goes to us on the 21st of September and the council on the 28th. Is that time frame, is there enough gap in that time frame, and is there any way there would be something come up at Audit and Risk that would stop it going to that next meeting, or is it more a stamping process, Nick? Sorry.
Yeah, it's really procedural. You'd hope that by the 21st, the idea is that the annual report always goes through to the Audit and Risk Subcommittee first for their review. And that meeting, of course, has you go through the annual report in detail with the auditors. And then it's Audit and Risk, assuming that your review, you're comfortable with it, then it goes to council the following week. So we just have a 1 week step. Generally, if there's anything that does pop out, it's just minor editorial points that people note. There might be some formatting or spelling, but by that point, where the auditors have been through their process and given effectively, they'll know what their opinion is on the financial statements, and so unless anything came out of that, you don't anticipate that there'll be any issue with it going to council a week later.
Thanks, Nick.
Kate, given the discussion with the auditor earlier, and where I raised the issue of how we translate the information that we have in those graphs to things that every person can read, and the questions is, especially since this will be the last thing signed off by this council, and then will have a big bearing on the next council and whoever that may be sitting around this table, is just understanding how is there an ability, and I want to influence it now so that you deliver a report that is not just numbers, but is the graph that may show that any deficit positions, whether it be by reserves or cumulative, which I think is really important. And I'm not quite sure how to deal with that today, but I want to influence it from the discussions we've had. And that's we had a side check, Alexa and I, in between the meetings, and I think it's something we would find useful. Can I sow that seed now? I know in other lives I have worked on what is the annual budget we have in that sort of one line, and whether we've got above it and below it. And I know you do some of that in your financial reporting, but I want to keep operational and CapEx quite separately in this discussion as well. Does that sound doable?
Yeah, we can go away and have a look at that. And it might be that some of that information it's better to think about how we present the quarterly reports, because the annual report, because it's audited, there is quite a prescribed format for a lot of the information that goes into there. But in the quarterly reports that we do that go through to council, and they're reported, the year end one is actually reported earlier than the annual report, and those reports aren't audited, and we can sort of use whatever format we want. And that's where we have been developing those quarterly reports and trying to look at how we present them in a way that makes it easier for people to understand. So we'll definitely go away and have a look at that. It is it's an ongoing work in progress how those develop. So we'll definitely look at it.
And I really appreciate that. And I know there's been a huge improvement there. And I think one of the complicating things, as you've just pointed out, is the annual reports has the asset value of the port, which we probably don't want to complicate by putting that in there and skewing all the numbers.
Okay, they're hearing you.
Thank you.
Yep, happy to move.
I'll second that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Andrew?
Aye.
Right. Just to check that he didn't have suddenly. Right.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, guys. Good work. Excellent. By guys, I include
Girls.
women, intersex, anybody else who's involved in this. That's a general term. Right, 7.2. Procurement and contract management. Andrew Douglas, you were the starter of this, making sure we had one of these more clearly in our suite of policies. Would you like to comment on what we have in front of us? I take it, sorry, Nick, I take it that you're just leaving it to us. You've done what you've done and you've written what you need to write. We didn't need a background from you first, Nick?
No, I don't think so. The paper outlines what the process was, and then the draft policy that is now procurement and contract management is there. And we've the previous procurement policy did include it included contract procurement, but didn't sort of expand further into the ongoing management of the contract. So that has been added, and how that should be undertaken. So yeah, really it's there for the subcommittee to provide any comment. From a staff point of view, we'd taken that through our internal policy review group last week. We just had an extra meeting just to go through this one before it came here, and then pending comments that come out of audit and risk, we'll take it back to the next policy group, and we can finalise it from there.
Thank you. Back to Andrew.
Sure. So thanks, Sarah and Nick, for your work done on this. It is looking good. So pretty happy with what I was reading. I just had 2 points. One was I was comparing it back against the previous policy, and I just did notice on where you talk about your procurement thresholds, that possibly in editing a bullet point may have been missed. So if we jump to page 3 of the actual policy document, in the very last paragraph, procurement between 25,000 and 100,000. The sections above and below it, the section above it talks about 3 written quotes, and below it talks about using a tender process. But then in that particular one, I think the 3 written quotes has disappeared.
Yes.
So that was just something I picked up as I was going through it. But I'll let you have a look and just check if that's the case or not.
Yeah, I could probably throw to Sarah, but the idea would be the procurement plan. In that case, because they write the procurement plan, it could be that they that they go with quotes, or that because it hasn't reached the threshold of the 100,000 for a tender, you could choose. But even though you might be procuring something that's say 30,000, you might choose to go out for tender. So that's where the procurement plan, you would actually document what approach you're taking. And at that point, you might choose, I suppose what we could put there is that it should be clear that it should be at least what is in the up to 25,000, unless the procurement plan says otherwise. So we could amend that to make it clear that you can actually just not have 3 quotes. So it does, yeah, it's linear. As you go up, it should be at least what was in the previous, but you could, in this case, even though it's not required, go, well, I'm still going to go out for tender for a piece of work that's $50,000 when the tender requirement is actually only for 100,000 plus.
Okay.
So you'll amend that, will you, Nick, just to make sure that it's
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
at least the above
Yep.
threshold when it moves down.
Yeah, we can modify that just so that that's clear.
And my second question, just a bit wider in terms of, going to ask, how do you ensure that once the policy is approved, how does it get communicated to all staff? All relevant staff anyway. This is from the point of view of you know, just great to do this work and get the policy done, and then getting the message out there to the floor.
Yeah, so there'll be a couple of methods that when we go through and policies are approved, all of our policies are kept on our internal intranet. So all staff will then get informed that you know, a new policy or a policy change has happened. In the case of procurement like this, where there's changes, Sarah and her team will actually go out specifically to the staff that are involved in, you know, heavily involved in procurement, and make sure that they're given an update, you know, a training update on this as well.
Great. Yep. That would be.
We also, just to add to that, any new staff that start at council, they have to be trained on the procurement policy as well as the procurement system before they're given access to be able to purchase anything at council. So we try and make sure not only do we train our current staff, we make sure that staff coming on board at council are also trained on the policy and the system.
Fantastic. Thank you.
There's a policy of how to get the policy out there.
Yes, my team actually we try and meet with each department on a kind of a quarterly, 3-monthly basis to discuss their procurement and discuss any issues that they are having. And we make sure that they understand this policy and that there haven't been any anything perhaps that's been overlooked.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, looking at paragraph 6, I think it's great that you've got the IPOS, was it? Which I presume is an electronic procurement, and so it sets up the contract to be managed. And some will be contracts that are over in a week or a month. And I'm just understanding, when will they be reviewed, or it's not reviewed. And some of them will go into the system and then be out fairly quickly, I presume. It's the management things, the big bus ones is what I'm really thinking about, or even the wild and fine one we talked about earlier. It seemed to me that you've got one contract manager. There's no, when it's of a large quantum, just checking on that. I don't want to undermine the contract manager, but the oversight, or if something or a relationship's breaking down, is just having it supported or nurtured along and checked, because you're really, this sets up only one point of reference that if it's a weakness of a relationship or anything, could put a weakness in that contract. Does that make sense? I just didn't feel like it was, it didn't make, you know, if this was, these are massive, major financial things, some of these, but it doesn't have the oversight that we give for health and safety, where there's an independent person just checking that stuff's happening. And I'm just wondering whether, if that's normal, when whether it's normal in this council, or whether it's even normal in a corporate world, and that's something Andrew might be able to advise. Is it usual that it's just one person worrying about things?
So I'll say something if that's right. So yep, so certainly understand your point, Kate. I guess there's just two things that float through my mind on that. One is that what I would expect, even though it's not written in here, is that, okay, we've got this contract manager who will be a mid-tier management, but then you'd have whoever the GM is of that particular area over the top of their work in the day-to-day. So that's what would happen in a equivalent organization, which I would sort of expect to be in practice here. So it might not be spout out in those sorts of words here, but whoever the contract manager is likely going to have a boss who would be making sure they're carrying out their job and things can be raised to. So that would normally be happening. To your point though, how you equated it to health and safety, there is actually a good analogy that you can do and can be used in here, which is where contracts are rated by their risk, because not all contracts are equal. You might have a contract with somebody to clear the drains on your roof, or a contract for something a lot more risky and with a higher value. So you would expect more to be done over that contract. So you're right, not all contracts are equal, and some deserve more attention than others. And you can actually use that risk matrix that we've got in our risk register, which is likelihood and consequence of something going wrong.
Yeah.
And you can say, if you're rated higher up that scale, then we expect more to be done, more monitoring. So that philosophy can be used. I have seen that used elsewhere.
Well, I quite like that in light of it's a quantum and it's a risk thing, absolutely. In light of what we've learned from and why this is in here, in the wild and free one, I'd be interested in exploring that, and whether that should be in here at this level, or whether, I mean, we can't do it today, I appreciate that, but it's probably, that's where I was thinking that this would be more complex. I don't know, that's a statement, sorry, it's not really a question. I'm sure you've got questions.
Well, that perhaps leads into my question, two things. Because of the way I tend to read documents, we've suddenly got in the middle of 6, the contract manager, which we haven't had mentioned before. What we've got further up is include the position title of the council staff member accountable for the management of the contract. Could we just have in there, in brackets, the contract manager, so as we know who we're talking about? I mean, I presume that's who the contract manager is, that staff member who's accountable for the management of the contract. Is that, could we just make that clear that that's what we're talking about when we talk below about the contract manager? It might just seem pedantic, but I went looking through it to find out who was the contract manager. And
So you're talking about the second bullet point in 5 on the top of that page?
yes,
Yeah.
Could it just say at the end of the sentence, the contract manager?
Yeah.
So as we know who we're talking about further down when we start talking about them.
Mhm.
Is that just, it would just make it easier to read for people who look at things the way I do. Is that all right, Nick?
I'm not really following exactly which bit you're at, because in the middle of 5 contract establishment requirements, it has there the bit where it says every contract must include the position and title of the Otago Regional Council staff member accountable for the management of the contract. This person will be known as the contract manager and will be responsible for ensuring. So that's in 5, and then I thought you were talking.
That's not what else says.
That's not what ours says in 5.
It's actually in the page above. Yeah, I've just seen it too.
It's not repeated at the end of it.
Yeah.
Documentation of contract
Right.
establishment. That's the one you're looking at.
I'm looking at the one at the end of, at 5.1,
Yeah.
that second bullet point.
On the top
And
of
the
the
page
page.
above, has got
Yeah.
the same sort of definition, and that time they do call it the contract manager.
Yeah, so
Just to have it
I see what you mean, that you put it in the second bullet point, but yeah, I was reading it from the
Yes.
previous page through, so you'd already noted who the contract manager was in the page before, but yeah, we can just put in brackets contract manager
Yes.
there. That makes it clearer. It's no,
Sorry,
not,
just
not a big deal.
It's as you read through it, yeah. the second query I have, and it's whenever things change and you change things for a reason. And so what started this partly was that we didn't have an official contract management policy, although it was quite clearly woven in amongst documents we already had. But part of the reason that started that for me was the wilding pine issue. And so when you change something and you had an issue, does the change you make address the issue you had? And so what I'm asking myself, and therefore you, Nick, is if we had had this contract management and performance and procurement policy in place, would it have picked up the issue that we have had with wilding pines?
I
I think Mrs. Gardner would like. Do you want
I
to?
was just going to say, I think the contract management policy is around defining the expectations around contracts, and you put in who's doing what and what you expect. Usually contracts then define processes that happen throughout the life of the contract, and if any issues arise, around what the remediation process is. So I don't think the contract management policy here as it's written, and I don't think any contract management or procurement policy will do that. It's not trying to define every eventuality that may occur in a contract. It's really an overarching policy or process around what the expectations are around what will be done. So issues will arise in absolutely every contract that you can think of, unless they are really, really simple. You literally have a contract where somebody is going to do one simple thing and you make one simple payment. But you look at any typical construction contract and there will be variations. Some will be accepted, or you will define them and agree them up front and then do them. Other things will happen that something will happen unexpected, and then you use the contract as the process to work through how that is then remediated, and quite possibly payments are either added or deducted. The contract management policy that you've got here in front of you won't stop those issues happening in any contract, because that's how contracts work.
Well, I'm disappointed because it seems to me that we had a situation where we may have taken money from the government to do something, and we may have overspent it by $200,000. And in a situation where I would have thought we might have been able to prevent that happening. If we can't prevent that happening, that's concerning whenever we're taking government money. If we could find ourselves in that position, we have no ways of, So, Mrs. Gardner.
I'm sorry, but I think you're getting into public excluded material.
Sorry, yes. We just won't talk about quantums. Yes, sorry, beg your pardon, that was, yes. In general, the point I thought of a management policy. Andrew, would you like to help out here?
Yeah. So I guess sort of applying a lens to it, I'm looking at that section 6, which has sort of been sort of one of the key sections of the policy that's been refreshed, and especially the last paragraph there of it, which I think is really central to some roles and responsibilities. So I'll just read that out. So the contract manager is responsible for the ongoing management of the contract, including monitoring, auditing, and reviewing contract delivery against the agreed contract deliverables and performance expectations. So certainly my thoughts would be that sentence is the crux of it, and that's the one that I would just sort of say to the staff, if you could just reiterate that to your teams and to the contract managers, and include that up front in your training and comms to them. That would be the piece in my books.
I'm actually really comfortable with that whole 6 contract management, because I think that actually outlines it, and then that will just go back to directors correctly managing their staff and reviewing their staff performance on contracts. So I'm actually really comfortable with the way that's worded, because every contract is different, but what we're saying is we're going to have people responsible and they're monitoring things as they go through. So I think that's enough said there. Ruth.
Right. Mrs. Gardner.
Look, I have a slightly, it's not that I disagree with having a contract management policy, and I think, what Nick's provided you is perfectly adequate. But I don't believe that a contract management policy in and of itself will do anything. It all comes down to the way that the culture that you have and the way that you set expectations inside of your organisation. We all have policies inside of organisations, and not everyone always understands them or knows what they say completely. This is a particularly important one, I would agree, but I do think it's important to understand that inside of an organisation, it's not about the policy in and of itself. It is about the implementation of the policy and the culture in the organisation around the way that the work is done. So I just want to make the point that I don't think you can simply say, great, we've got a contract management policy and that's going to solve anything, because actually it's all about the culture and the way that the organisation operates and runs. Inside of our organisation, we have different delegations. We can have people at relatively low-level delegations who run contracts. And it's not necessarily that a general manager is going to be looking in detail at those contracts each day. We have different delegations of different financial amounts that allow empowerment of our staff so that they can take into their responsibility that level of contract management. What we do have is a sign-off process. And that means that depending on financial delegations, you have a one-up situation. So staff often generate contracts that are signed off then by people who hold the delegation for the amount of money, whether that's Nick as a GM or myself, sometimes as the chief executive, depending on the cost of a contract. So I guess all I'm doing is making the point that it would be false to think that a contract management policy in and of itself would have prevented any situation in which there was untidiness around a contract. That comes down to management, leadership, the culture inside your organisation.
Point well made, Mrs. Gardner. And what I meant to say earlier wasn't to suggest that we had a problem so much as that when we're alerted to the possibility of something not happening quite as you described, untidiness around a contract, we would usually look to see, is the things we could put in place which would make that more robust or less likely to happen in the future time. And and as I think you're saying, the culture of the organisation is a lot of what informs us and educates us and helps us to learn with a continuous improvement lens tomorrow from what has happened today. So I'm just thinking that the framework, you look at a framework and you imagine whether that helps so as that people go through a process that is robust and makes it more likely that good things will happen on the way through and fewer untidinesses will happen. So, and it's good to have this here and we can see how it works, and if it works well, that's good. Kate.
I quite like, thank you. Look, I'm happy with it, but I do like the idea that we actually do have a consideration, or that the staff have consideration of the risk of the contract. And I'm just going to turn this around and test it in a different way as well. And that's, so I'm parking that issue that we had in discussion with Andrew. The responsibility does not sit solely, does it, with the contract manager? It does go up a chain as well. And that is what I also want to check, that we're not, this isn't a witch hunt. If something goes wrong, we're not just holding the person as a contract manager necessarily responsible. And that's what I also think, that we need to make this employees safe and feel able to go and do that, but without taking the whole burden of the responsibility of the contract. If they've got 30 contracts to manage, they're under the pump because we're short-staffed or whatever, we also have to make sure that they've upwards. Does that make sense? And maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way. So I'm just doing this from both directions. Does it look safe for an employee? Have
the right number of eyes.
Yeah.
Been over.
And then
whatever.
So it's and from this way, I'm feeling really sorry, given that for some people who may have a lot of contracts to manage, that are they well enough reported? So I'm just like, I don't know. It's that nuance that isn't in here that slightly concerns me. I'm happy to leave it at the moment. You guys know more about this than I do, but if I was looking at that and saying, does that person who's been delegated those jobs feel really safe? I don't know. Again, maybe one for you, Andrew. I don't know.
All right. I think it's good to have more of this on paper or a bit more collected together than we had before. I think that's really helpful.
But I do, I'm still not quite sure that it will fix the issue that it's meant to address.
Yes. So, Mrs. Gardner.
Thank you. I was just going to respond to Councillor Wilson. Look, I actually, I think in the circumstance that you all understand, what is very interesting to me is that the staff did exactly what they should have done when it appeared that there'd been an issue with a contract. So in the first instance, there was a process that was followed in order to find out exactly what had happened, and there was some management of this. What I find concerning is that all through that particular situation, there has been some suggestion that that wasn't the right course of action. So I think we're getting mixed messages, and we need to be really clear about your expectations, because I would have said, if any of my staff came to me and said there was a contract management issue, and then we went through a process and investigated it and found, in fact, that there had been a problem, to me, that would have been something that I would have been extremely proud of them for in terms of managing that risk. We all understand risk, but I do think the messages have been quite mixed in the situation that we've dealt with, because what I have understood is great concern about the fact that the contract and the way that the contract was breached caused concern to the other party. So I think we need to be really clear about what the message is to staff here, because it's been very confused.
Can I just make a comment there? I think from my side, my part would be that we have a very robust contract in place, process in place that actually protects our staff exactly from that. And I'm very comfortable with the way that staff did react and brought it to everyone's attention. We've gone through and someone's dragging the chain for a final decision, but that's the whole part of reviewing our contract policy, is to ensure it's not actually I review it to make sure A, my staff are right, and B, my organisation's right. So that's the intent of looking at that, or my intent of looking at this here anyway. So.
And for my part, I would say that I like that this organisation describes itself as one of continuous improvement. And part of that is whenever anything happens that you think, oh, that was either unintended or unexpected and unwelcome, that you look and think, well, what do we learn from that? How do we move forward? What do we learn? Is there anything different? Could we have this? Was this a perfect storm that was absolutely unguessable? Did we do the best we could in the circumstances with the intent, not of that we are imperfect human beings, but with the intent of if there's anything we might do differently now that we know that sometimes over the horizon bad things turn up, then we learn. And so that's, to me, it's that continuous improvement thing, that you learn something for today, so as if there's anything that you might do tomorrow that might be better, that's good. So it's absolutely, in my mind, not a what went wrong today being a witch hunt, but it is an intention to always think, if something untoward happens, can we learn from that for tomorrow? Did you want to say something? Right. Andrew Douglas?
Sure. So my just final comment would be that I do think we could enhance this one further area, and that is by incorporating that risk lens to it. And I think that would be beneficial when talking to staff on it and sort of training them and part of that culture piece, because you're very right, it is all about culture and how people are going about their day to day. And I think explaining it through a lens of not all contracts are equal or weighted the same, and using a tool like the consequence and likelihood scale can be a method that people would understand, and it gives them a tool, but with some flexibility in it, so it molds it to their own scenario of what they're working in. That's what I would like to see in it.
Could you take that on board, Nick? Can't hear you. Looking forward to it.
Right.
You can.
I'd thought about that when Andrew had mentioned it earlier about the risk thing, because I was thinking, I thought we had a piece in there about risk, and we did in the bullet points in the procurement piece. We say the contract all contracts must take reasonable steps to ensure that council is not exposed to unacceptable risk. I think that sort of covers the procurement. We don't mention the risk in the contract management, so we could maybe mention that. But whether about the contract manager, where we say about the delivery, them reviewing and doing things, and I think they need to manage the ongoing risk as well. In the policy itself, I'd probably leave it at that. But I think behind this, in our other documentation that we've got, particularly around what Sarah works through with, with the procurement staff who are involved, I think we can develop a guideline around assessing the risk of contracts. So, but I'd leave it out of the policy itself, because I think it'll change, as we develop, and that way we're not constantly changing the policy, and then we can actually just create a guideline that we could go, here's how you should assess the risk, and depending on where it sits, we'd expect if they're in this level of risk, you will be looking to do X amount of monitoring and reporting and that sort of stuff. But right now I'd probably leave it out of the policy, and we'll develop that in a parallel and have it as part of our other documentation that we have around contracts, like the policy mentions that we have standard, we have procurement plan templates, and we have standard contracts, as templates. And I think we develop the risk analysis as part of that procurement planning documentation. So I think we can definitely work on that, but probably just add the risk management into the contract management paragraph as well.
That sounds good, Nick. Could we just add therefore a sentence somewhere on this saying, and in accordance with any guidelines or
Mhm.
whatever they are, is that from time to time, you know, the background. So add in that that's from time to time, some in the background, something that also needs to be taken into consideration by.
It's
Very good.
So guidelines and templates or whatever they are that stands behind it. And as you say, then they can change that. You can change that on a dime if you want to. Excellent.
that's great.
Right. And that's,
Happy to
Um,
note.
yes. Kevin's moving to note it. Andrew, would you like to second that?
I would.
All those in favour?
Right.
Aye. Kevin?
Absolutely.
That'll do it. Right. Moving on. Yes. Corporate policy overview report. Nick?
Yeah, this is just standard quarterly paper that comes to every audit and risk, just outlines what that the policy review group that I mentioned has been doing. The previous meeting was back in February, so there was one policy looked at there around the contractor health and safety, and then the meeting that we just had prior to this audit and risk to look at procurement and contract management, which you've now just looked at. We also looked at our vehicle policy and the associated safe driving policy. And both of those policies are now going out to staff just to consult with staff before they'll come back to the policy review group before we finalise those. So, yeah, just an update on the progress of that group's work.
Well, there is something that will come up later in a minor tangential sense about this, but I'm happy to move that we note this report. Seconded by
I
Kate.
just had one question to
Kate.
Nick.
Yeah, Kevin.
Or
Sorry.
Nick and Sarah, really. So is there any policy that you feel we're lagging behind that we need to put some emphasis on or be given support to? Is there anything that's concerning you that's not done, especially in those red markers?
No, there's no burning issues there with our policies. There's just, we're just going through a process of regular reviews, or some of them are have been outstanding for review, but fundamentally there's a policy there and it's fine. Usually what happens is, as we something changes and you go, oh, a policy needs to be changed. We've been working through those ones, so a lot of these policies are new or have been reviewed and amended quite recently due to various changes. And the other thing is on the particularly on the health and safety, and the staff, welfare side of it. There's been a huge amount of development in the policy space there, which is really good, just from the point of view of making sure that we're fulfilling our obligations, particularly under the Health and Safety at Work Act.
Yeah.
Mrs. Gardner. Sorry.
That's good. Yep.
Mrs. Gardner.
Look, I think compared to where we started 4 years ago, we are in really good shape, and there's been a huge amount of work. The policy review committee and individual staff have done a massive amount of work. We have really good engagement when we consult on our policies from staff and valuable input, which is important. Recently, for example, we found some gaps. One was in the situation where staff might drive in a vehicle, and I use vehicle kind of loosely, that we don't own on somebody's property. So, for example, how do we ensure staff safety when they're climbing into a farmer's ute or onto the back of a quad bike, for example. So we've looked at that really carefully, done a risk assessment and built a policy that provides for that scenario, because we found it was a gap. I think possibly the one that we yet to consult on, but is in progress, that I don't think it'll be controversial so much, but I do think it's always a challenging one for organisations, is the drug and alcohol policy. We are an alcohol-free site, which means we do not have alcohol on site at all. And of course, being a public agency, we don't have any provisions for alcohol expenditure. However, of course, we also have a significant fleet, and an enormous amount of our work is based around using vehicles. And so it is important that we have a drug and alcohol policy, but we did deliberately make sure that we didn't, what we intended was to develop our wellbeing framework first and have specific policies around wellbeing, including the drug and alcohol policy hanging off that. So that is one that is red, I think, and has further work to be done. But we're getting some expert help with that one, just because we're getting into some complicated territory there around how we deal with that.
Happy to move it. Has it already
I
been
think
moved?
we've been moved and seconded.
Actually,
If there's no further debate, then all those in favour?
Aye.
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 Carried. Right, safety and wellbeing. Hello. Would you like to talk to this, or are you happy to take it as read? Or
I
what
was
do you-
hoping to take it as read
Right.
and happy to speak to any points or answer any questions.
How's your 15-minute challenge going?
Well,
Whose team are you on?
we haven't. We've got to put together a team. It's hot on the agenda at our team meeting next week. We've had really good uptake so far. We've had quite a few people register, quite a few teams register. But it actually starts at the end of May. So we're just going through
Oh,
the
right.
team registration.
So when it
process
says
at the moment.
planned date June, I understand that it's a 6-week challenge.
It is.
So if
yeah.
you've got to finish it in June, you best get on with it now. That's all I'm
I
saying.
think it starts on the 1st of June, yeah, or 30th of
Oh,
May,
right.
yeah. So yeah,
We-
we've had some good
We look
uptake.
forward to hearing the
Seen the
results of it.
photos, yeah.
I understand Amanda's a keen supporter of her team.
Yes, very much so.
I'm not seeing Nick leaping up and down yet, but I'm sure he's
probably
he's
on
raring
the
to go.
I can
Steve
comment for
Woman, right?
corporate finance does have a team, and there is some quite fierce competition on team names.
And what's your team name? Is it Let's Get Fiscal?
Yes.
Got some pretty cool team names happening, yeah.
And Anita?
I've heard no discussion at all about it, so I will get
I'd
some
be on for if I were
action.
you.
As a dog owner, I have to walk every day, so for me, I feel like everyone should be clamouring for me to be in their team, but the invitations aren't coming, so I'll
Be on our team if you want to, Anita.
There you go.
It's good to see people going over
Right.
groups.
And
Yes,
yes,
yeah.
I'm on the pedometers.
there we go.
Predominators, yeah.
Predominators.
Dominator.
Yes.
I hope Nick's team's result counts. Took a long time to think of that. Sorry.
Yeah.
And Dr. Palmer, you're sitting quietly in the corner there.
Yeah, it's all good.
You're on the team.
It's a team name.
Not yet, not yet. Working on that.
Still a bit of time to
Because,
register.
I mean, leadership starts at home, if you know what I mean. And these are leaders are in our room here.
We could have a council team if you
Actually,
like to join.
yes, you should have invited us because, but I mean, you know.
You're going to lead us. Good on you.
Well, you do a lot. I yes, do my share. As Kevin wanted to put his hand up to
Oh, yeah, I've just
run
got
a
a few
team.
questions on.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I can name any team.
Take it as read and Kevin's going to ask you some questions.
Yeah, onto page 36, senior leadership development and engagement. Just the last sentence where with the effect workplace mental health services and that were coming along, and you've postponed that course. Where is that at now? Well, I'll take a wee step back. I just think that's a great scope of what you're trying to do there. Absolutely superb. So where are you at with that now? What's
Yeah,
happening
we
there?
actually, I think it was last week before the Jay, who's our facilitator, was just unwell. So that was the reason behind it. So we just need to basically reschedule
Cool.
that, and I'll be having a chat. I've got my ELT safety update on Monday. So we'll be talking about when we want to reschedule that in for.
And then just going to page 37, which you just about had to turn into page 38.
And I don't
You've
have
got-
page numbers on my one.
Oh, sorry, which is table 1, wellbeing initiative.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so what I said there is you probably just about need another, but you've just got so much actually happening there.
I know.
Which,
Getting a lot, isn't it?
which is absolutely superb, but there's two parts to that is really, have you got too much happening? And also how are you measuring the effectiveness of these? I just think they're superb. I'm not, it's not as a criticism, but have you got where do you deem it to have too much happening in that space? And how are you measuring the effectiveness of some of these things? I don't necessarily need to know them all, but it'll be
No,
just
they're
sort of
good.
quite-
Those are good questions. And measuring well-being can be a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
Our key measure is participation. So with a lot of these things like the challenges like the health seminars, we measure attendee numbers. And so we're looking for increasing participation rates. We don't have a particular target. It's very difficult to kind of benchmark out there that we want to achieve at least, 50% or something like that. We had a target for the Wellbeing Challenge that we wanted at least 20% participation, and we'll definitely get that. That was also to avoid a fee associated with the provider providing it for us. All of our interventions are assessed with an annual survey, and so the other evaluation is staff feedback. So it's more like qualitative feedback, I suppose, in conjunction with participation numbers. And so what we're really looking at is we've got our participation numbers from last year, and we're aiming to ramp that up for this year. And I guess we just want to keep seeing increased participation, increased engagement, and that qualitative feedback that we're getting through the surveys. And a lot of, even though it does seem like a lot of these things, such as Pink Shirt Day coming up, it really is just a little bit of building awareness. There's no cost to that. We're sort of just going off the back of interventions that are out there in the community. So a lot of it sort of looks like a lot, but the actual, I guess, effort behind it is, there's not a huge amount of effort, I suppose, and time and money behind all of that, if you like.
Yeah. And look, I'm just making a comment. The fact that you're picking up all those things, I think, is really critical as well. So, just well done on that. So that's good. That answers my question. Keep it going and keep it flowing. So,
thank
really
you.
good.
Yeah, if I could just add as well, I think in terms of the number of things going on, I mean, part of that is also about catering for quite a diverse workforce.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be that every staff member would attend or participate in every challenge or every seminar. We've got young, we've got old, we've got, gender, we've got all those sort of different staff members who have got interest in different things. So this tries to cater for that broad group.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks so much.
I've got a general question. And I don't like this term, but apparently everybody understands what it means apart from me. So what keeps you awake at night?
Indigestion was the answer yesterday.
Was it my answer yesterday, because it's a silly question from my point of view, but in this space, what keeps you awake at night?
I mean, I guess probably if I can answer personally, I started life as a healthcare professional, a physiotherapist by trade. And so I've always been about just making sure that people get home at the end of the day safely and not injured. I've had a background of dealing with people that are injured at work, from my days as a healthcare practitioner. And so that's no different for me now, that the worst thing that could happen to ORC staff member is that they become injured or unwell or pass away at work. And that's, I think, why I'm on the job that I am. And so it doesn't keep me awake at night, but it's why we're here and it's what we're doing. And it's not just about complying with the law and following industry best practice. We're here to, you know, to make sure that people go home safely at the end of the day.
And better people than they started, preferably. Or,
Ideally,
well,
not
no,
always.
Better
not
people's not the
always,
right description, but
realistic. Yeah.
In a better space than they were when they arrived, perhaps.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's why obviously all of, you know, I'm sure Sarah would say exactly the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure she would.
And everyone.
Any other comments from anybody? Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Andrew, and then followed by Mrs. Gardner.
So I've just got a question just around sort of COVID-related sickness, and actually might be best answered by Sarah. I was just wondering what the staff COVID-related or staff sickness has been like, I guess, over the last couple of months or so, and with that sort of been impacting on workability, just and ability to deliver. And I guess I just asked that from knowing that in some organizations it is and in others it isn't. So I was just really interested to know how it is here at the moment. I guess those people might not be sick with COVID themselves, they might just be sickness for whatever the reason. So
yeah. Well, I think overall we've been extremely fortunate. And I think that there's good reason for that. We've had a continuity management team running now since the very first lockdown. We have constantly revised the measures that we've had in place to ensure that our staff are as safe and as informed as they possibly can be. We've been flexible as an organisation. We've refined our flexible work policy. We've continued to refine our business continuity planning. So I think what has helped us on this particular outbreak is we went early. So we were prepared. We went early. We had a business continuity plan. We always operate inside of the parameters of the government advice, but our business continuity plan was overlaid over the top of that, largely because our work, of course, also involves being able to respond to incidents and emergencies. We need to be able to have enough people who are well, who can respond to a flood event or a civil defence emergency, or a large pollution incident. So we do operate a 24/7 situation, and we have had no business interruption as a consequence of the planning that we had done going early and our flexible working arrangements, which have meant that we've had a 50% occupancy or less in our buildings over this period, which I think has really helped. Also, we did enact a policy that required vaccination and proactively managed those who were not vaccinated. There were no job losses, and we have since revised that in light of new government policy. So we've consulted every time we've revised the policy and have now come back into line with government policy. But having said that, the encouragement that we are giving is, and staff are practicing mask wearing in most circumstances where there are multiple people, and in all of our public or shared spaces. So that's continuing. So we've actually done really well. We've kept a track of those who have been isolating or those who have been ill, and that's probably been at its maximum in the last couple of weeks. But again, we haven't had any significant business interruption at all.
No, great, thanks for that update. It's good to see that the planning you put in place, and then the mitigations and keeping the staff segregated where needed, has resulted in good good outcome.
I think, Mrs. Gardner, you had your hand up before. Andrew.
Yes, I did. I really just wanted to highlight to you really the risk that I spoke about in the finance annual plan workshop the other day. There is what I think is a pending crisis for local government generally. As I understand it, there is a 20% vacancy rate in local government at the moment. And recruitment, retention and resilience is a real challenge. So our point of difference over the last few years has been our flexible work policy, our wellbeing arrangements, the way that we care for our staff. And I think it's really important to recognise that that package and empathy that we have for our staff is the thing that means that they choose us at times over other organisations, and sometimes they even choose us for less money. I'm really aware that you're facing a change in leadership, and I would just implore you to manage that risk well, and to think about how you steady the ship over this time, because my fear is that, if we don't maintain some of the things that make us different and attract people to our organisation, we won't only not attract them, but we won't retain them. And if we are unforgiving on our people, then they will not be, their resilience will not be sustained either. So I do think at the moment employers are managing a very difficult situation, and one that requires a lot of thought around how you keep a culture of an organisation and how you put those things first so that your employees are best supported. So I'm just flagging with you that I think it's a risk that you want to be aware of, and I'm not saying it's all to do with the fact that you're having a change in leadership. I'm also saying it's about a circumstance that it's affecting local government generally, and there needs to be a level of awareness about that. If you don't have people, we don't make widgets, so you don't have anything else, and that is really important.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardner. I'd be hoping that you could leave us with what you consider to be the most important parts of your wisdom relating to staff and other management processes around the place to help us on our journey forward. If you could do that for us.
I think you're in incredibly good shape in terms of the executive leadership team. It's not work that I've done on my own. The leadership team is a huge part of the culture that's being developed for the organisation, but I do think it needs to continue to be supported, and those health, wellbeing and staff priorities need to be maintained as priorities. Otherwise, I think that we will suffer some of the same fate as other organisations at the moment, and have some real difficulty in delivering the work program.
Could I just look, Sarah? I've really appreciated your candour on this matter right through the annual plan process. I always get my annuals and longs mixed up, but bringing that to my attention last week when we were talking about annual plan and pressures, and again today. So it's absolutely top of mind, and it is critical. Right at the end of the day, we are people. We're people dealing with people. So we've just got to have that absolutely right and as good as we can. So thanks very much for highlighting that, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Kate, thank you. I had a question. I don't want to take away from that. Thank you, Sarah. But my question is actually about other things, and I just want to go back. I am really interested in, it is a busy wellness program you've got. I just wanted to check a couple of things and then a different insight. When these activities like the 15-minute, is that in work time or outside work time? And when these things are happening, how much of it is paid or unpaid? And appreciating that you can't do all of these things. It's just wondering how that works.
The 15-minute challenge is just generally speaking, like, you know, it might be like Anita said, she's gone to walk her dog after work sort of thing. So, and I guess, you know, we're also trying to encourage people to get outside on their lunch break and go for a walk around the block, and sort of, which, you know, I'm guilty of not doing that myself sometimes. So we haven't stipulated specifically it must be inside or outside of work. Obviously, people are, you know, entitled to their morning tea and their afternoon tea and their lunch break. We wouldn't sort of think that people are going to be sort of spending an hour walking around the block in the afternoon outside of their normal break times, but it is just more generally speaking.
Yeah, it's I mean, people, I know a lot of people go on walking meetings, which for work, and it's a great way of, you know, getting it out and doing both. And it is hard to rationalize or manage some of that stuff, but it's the flexibility that you have looking at how people are best do this stuff. And it just, I'm also very aware that there's a team red for Otago Regional Council, which is a blood donating thing, which is also about some people's wellness is actually about what else they can do for other people. And again, understanding whether that's something that's done in work time or not work time and stuff like that it's just understanding how we reflect that culture that Sarah's been talking about.
Yeah, a lot of the interventions, I mean, and a lot of stuff doesn't actually take time.
No.
A lot of this interventions we offer are lunch and learns. So they'll be in the lunch break where the idea is that people can, you know, sit and have their lunch and listen to an educational seminar, for example. And some of the things are linked in quite closely with safety. So for example, the ergonomic webinars. So, you know, as part of health and safety management, looking after staff, and those would be in work time, in the same way that we might have, you know, de-escalation training and other types of safety training. There's a lot of overlap there. So I wouldn't, and I definitely take your point that encouraging walking meetings and things like that would be a great way to incorporate the 15-minute challenge. We're quite limited in that because we've also got so many people working from home and working remotely that so many meetings these days are virtual meetings. So that might be a little bit of a challenge, but we definitely wouldn't be expecting that. You could, dial in, exactly,
And your dog, since a lot of people
You could.
appear
You
on
could just
Zoom
do
to
some
have
star
dogs.
jumps maybe at home.
Nick introduced us to a dog the other day, and we've had Anita regularly showing us cats and dogs.
Right.
Okay. It is, but people, it is knowing that stuff is work or not work. It's a fine line sometimes. So thank you for explaining that.
Right. Were you moving
Yes,
to
happy
this
to.
report?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you very much.
Seconded by Kevin, and thank you. It's exciting, all the initiatives you have.
Thank you.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Right.
Aye.
Happy to move the
Right.
back into non-public.
Thank you. Yes.
Seconded.
So make it
Right. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.